Welcome to Turning Pages, a series of in-depth conversations with authors about their works. All right, well, award-winning author David A. Robertson has released several books, several series. It seems like this one is the start of a new series. The Kodiaks Home Ice Advantage is the book. He joins us on Turning Pages. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So based on the title, is this like the start of a Kodiak series?
The plan is to do more of them. I don't know how many more. Right now, we have it planned as a duology, but I guess we'll see how the first two books do, and definitely have some ideas of where we could take the story if we want to do more of them. I have a bit of experience writing series, so I kind of like it. You get a lot of room for character development and story development, world building. But yeah, we're gonna take the first two and then see where it goes from there.
Did it come to you as, a two-book story initially, or did you have the seeds of just like a character? How did this kind of develop?
So my older son is a hockey player, and he one year when he was, I think, nine or 10, he played on a team called the Kodiaks, and they were a pretty good team, but they were up against this juggernaut. It was from the kind of like the Tuxedo, Corden, River Heights kind of area of the city, and they went on this went into the playoffs. I think they went being one of the favorite teams, and they got upset their first game, and so they got knocked down to the B side, and they had to win like some ridiculous amount of games to get back to the city final because it's double knockout format. And so they went on this crazy run of winning all these games, and they were all like 1-goal games, overtime winners. And it was this really exciting playoff run, and they eventually lost in the city final. But it was the most fun, one of the most kind of fun times I've had watching hockey. And I remember when it was over, I was like, I need to kind of think about how I can write this as a story. This would be so cool. And it kind of just percolated for a long time, just waiting to like the right time to kind of shape it into something. And of course, like with the books that I do, I try to figure out how I'm going to approach it in terms of the educational value as well. So I needed to figure that angle out as also. So I didn't really have an idea initially for two. I just thought I want to write about this playoff run. And then I kind of just took that seed and expanded it from there. One of the kids that Cole played with, his dad had this nickname in when he was younger because it was Dusty Bender. And I thought that was such a cool name for a character. So I thought I'm going to take that name and I'm going to make it into like the central part of the next book. So I'm kind of figuring out how to do that right now. But so initially it was just like inspired by my son's hockey team and a run they went on, and then kind of built it out from there.
So wanting to kind of recapture some of the drama and the highs of that playoff run?
Yeah, I think there's something special about, playoff hockey. I've watched enough of it over the years, just like, with my kids playing and, obviously with watching the NHL. And I just think there's something magical and intense and just joyous and about like the whole atmosphere. And I wanted to recapture that. I just thought there's something so cinematic about it. And I tend to be a visual cinematic writer. And so it just kind of fit for me in trying to relive that moment. And yeah, I think a part of it too is just like a little nostalgic for me as well. Just wanting to like go back to that time and think about how much fun it was for Cole and for, me and his mom. And so I try to recapture a little bit of that. And then, sprinkle in as well some, I think, important teachings about, what I've seen in the culture of hockey, and opening up a conversation about that.
You mentioned being a visual or cinematic writer. I was curious about whether writing hockey action poses like a different challenge than writing action in any other kind of book that you've written, that like describing hockey believably, does that create something of a challenge for you?
It does in a way because, I think that like if you're writing directly to hockey fans, there's a certain way that you can write where a hockey fan, someone who's like really articulate in like, hockey terminology and watch a lot of hockey, they'll get a lot of that. You can go like, oh, like, go in top shelf, find the cookies. That's, that sort of thing, like all these kind of hockey terms. And but you have to also like cater to as well, like readers who may not be as nuanced in like, the whole hockey jargon. And so it's difficult in trying to describe like the action in a way that isn't kind of like excluding anybody. And you have to make it more universal. But in terms of just the action of hockey, it was just finding a way to do it that wasn't, stereotypical, that was kind of like, still breathtaking, that was exciting. And I think you try to do that with any kind of action scene you read in any kind of book. You just have to figure out how to do it and how to be, engaging and how to kind of bring the reader into the action. And so you use a lot of visceral like language, like, the churning of, the blades against the ice, and kind of bring them in by engaging all the senses. And so I just try to do that with the hockey scenes in this book as well.
Right. Like jargon can be exclusionary in some sense. Like if you don't know kind of the secret handshake words, particularly so, I guess,
Yeah,
for
exactly.
a younger audience, like thinking the fact that kids might have not have learned some of this terminology yet.
Well, that was a main concern for me, and honestly, like I don't know a lot of the terms, because I'm just like I'm approaching 50, so I'm probably like more of an old school, I know, a hockey fan, like hockey parent. So I did have to think about like, okay, what are some more like universal terminology that everybody would get. But you do definitely have to think about exclusionary language. You don't want to like leave, because I think the main, like the cardinal sin, I think in writing is when you kind of use language or you write scenes that kind of bring the reader out of the experience, and they realize that they're just reading a book and they're not in the actual story. So you have to make sure that you're using language and you're writing scenes that are always thinking about, I'm absorbing the reader into the story. They feel like they're watching it in the rink, not reading it on the page. And if you could do that, then I think you're really accomplishing a lot of what a book should do, is what's engaging, and then engagement, fosters this really connection between the reader and the characters.
How do you accomplish that when it comes to like the educational aspects of this, right? You mentioned that, you wanted a way into this story that wasn't just capturing the, high of that 6-game playoff run, but that like there was some sort of teaching or impulse to kind of
Yeah.
convey some ideas.
Well, I guess that's the thing too, is you want to like look at the culture of hockey. You want to look at the love of this game that I have, and a lot of people have, and you want to kind of have a commentary about it without condemning it. And I think that that's the main thing, is you don't want to, just like you don't want to exclude the reader, you don't want to kind of like you don't want to like exclude the sport, or give some kind of like a condemnation of the sport that alienates people who love the game. So I think like the main thing is, just like you want to do with your characters, you want to make things relatable. And so you want to talk about things that people are well aware or exist within the culture of hockey. As much as we love the game, and I love the game, there are problems with it. And I think a lot of people know that, it's very, it's a sport with a lot of, this kind of like hyper masculine behavior, where it's not the safest place always if you're a person of color, or if you're someone from the LGBTQIA2S community, and so that culture is gradually changing. But I've seen it firsthand, and I've known kids who have experienced a lot of discrimination and hardship because of that kind of culture that exists, and so if we don't talk about it, then we can't fix it. And so what I wanted to do with this book, what I try to do with all my books, is just kind of like I present an issue, and then hopefully elicit some sort of conversation from people. And that's why, like, with my books, I like to think of them in use in the classroom, because a teacher is a great person to guide that conversation. And so we can talk about, hockey. We can love the, action scenes. We can relive kind of like some of the really thrilling moments. But we can also look at some of the issues that this book hopefully brings up in a really nuanced way. And we can talk about, okay, well, let's talk about kind of the discrimination. Like, what did Alex go through here? How does that relate to the real world? And then what are some things that we can do to kind of make sure that we start to, create some kind of lasting change over the course of time, because it's not an overnight thing. But that's kind of how I approached it. And I think the main thing is that you want to do this without taking away from the story. So you want to kind of like weave it into the story, and because you can alienate readers by doing that too.
So Alex Robertson, your central character, did you hit upon him and his kind of like journey from Norway House to Winnipeg to allow you to tell like a story of someone acclimating from out of the city, and as an Indigenous person being on the receiving end of racism on the rink? Like, did Alex help you kind of tell the message you were trying to achieve, or did Alex kind of experience things and then that allowed you to think about what messages you could conceive of surrounding his life?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think Alex was really a vehicle, to do that. So I definitely created the character of Alex as a way to bring up the issues that I want to address in the novel. Aside from just the excitement and the main the heart of the story. So I worked as well before in like indigenous employment and training, and I know the difficulties in what it's like to transition from living in a remote community to living in an urban setting. And so there's that kind of transition and the adaptation that's required to complete, and the culture change from living like somewhere that's remote to somewhere that's someone may not even have ridden a bus before or had a bank account before. And so there's all these kind of things that we need to get used to, to learn about. So the whole experience of moving to the city, and then compounding the difficulties of actually adapting to living in a big city, having to face some of the discrimination that Alex faces. Like, it's kind of like, with the character, you kind of pile everything onto them, and then you kind of let them, figure out a way to get out of it, and how they're going to kind of like, whether it's through strength of character, whether it's finding ways to stand up to people who are bullying him, like whatever it might be. That character undergoes some sort of a positive change that strengthens their character, and it shows other people who are reading this story maybe a way to address these difficulties as well.
He's 11, turning 12 in this book. Was it important that he was at this age in development?
Yeah, I think so. I think like we originally had him as, I think, 9 or 10. And then we just realized that some of these issues were like a bit more mature. So we aged him up a year or two. But at that age, 11 and 12, like kids are, I do a lot of school visits. I do them usually every day, at least one. And I visit a lot with kids in junior high and elementary school. And so I think I know them pretty well. And I also know how smart they are. I know how sophisticated they are. I know the kind of things that they deal with. I know how equipped they are now these days to address some of the difficulties that they face, but they also face a lot of stuff that I did when I was a kid. There's still bullying prevalent in schools. There's still things that kids have to face that they have to learn how to deal with in ways that are productive, that help them to grow and help them to have like agency and autonomy and self empowerment, that sort of thing. And so I think that, and also having like a love interest like kind of like Jenny. Love interest obviously is just like, at that age it's different, right? Like 11 or 12-year-old, but old enough to have an interest in girls, right? And so that kind of like, we had to find like the right age to do all of that. And I just felt like at 11 or 12, I felt like that was the right time to have Alex to have that kind of agency that he needed, but also to deal with some of like the stuff that kids, have to deal with that are, sometimes difficult and sometimes kind of fun. Because, it's fun to have a crush. So, that was kind of the right age for that, for us to choose.
Yeah, it seemed to me like that being a preteen, that's kind of on the cusp of kind of figuring out who you are in some sense. And this book forces Alex to kind of figure out who he is in some ways through the mechanics of, moving and adjusting.
Yeah, it's definitely a coming of age story, and it is a crucial time, like moving into teenage years, and we want to follow Alex into his teenage years. It's a time where he's really coming into his own, and it is a crucial time because of the things that he's facing is going to dictate what kind of person he becomes. And any good book will take a character, they'll put them through a situation that that gets kind of in the way of their goals, and they have to find a way to overcome those obstacles and to grow as a character, and to strengthen themselves as a character and as a person. And I think that's like also what makes Alex a really relatable character, whether you're Indigenous or non-Indigenous reader. There's something in Alex that I think a lot of people can relate to, or some of the surrounding characters that he's friends with.
You'd mentioned how he faces challenges. Sometimes he doesn't face them that well, and I'm curious about making sure that he doesn't always have the answers or doesn't come up with the right answer, and how important that was to either believability or to kind of the progress of like learning and growing.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. I think it's like the believability, it's the relatability. Because like Alex is not a perfect person. No, nobody is. And he has to learn. And initially, like he encounters things that cause him to react in ways that probably aren't the healthiest ways. Whether they're ways that he feels about himself, or the ways that he feels about people within his community, because of the things that he's experiencing. He might react with anger. He might react like by removing himself emotionally or physically. And so it's all part of the growth process. And like the fact that Alex is flawed and he reacts emotionally and quickly sometimes as he grows throughout the book, I think it's important because everybody's done that. I think that everybody can relate to that. As much as everybody can relate to the fact that over time, if you get the right guidance, if you get the right kind of experiential, the right kind of experience, that you learn to deal with things more productively. You learn to deal with things in healthier ways. That not only helps you grow as a person, but it helps other people grow too. And that's like for me the main thing is Alex is somebody who like he learns that people who have these attitudes that may be discriminatory or racist against him or Indigenous people in general, oftentimes that comes from a place of ignorance, that is not really like overt or intentional, often. And so he learns that he has a responsibility to educate people, so that not only can he grow, but other people can grow around him. And I think that's an important, part of this journey that Alex is on in this book, is like coming to himself by growing and improving as a person. And everybody's on that journey.
Yeah, late in the book, you have Alex consider this kid Jackson, his opponent, and he basically like thinks to himself like maybe he had parents who raised him with these attitudes, or like or maybe he just doesn't even realize he has these attitudes. Like you have him considering that. And it made me think back to early in the book when Alex's father says, people are going to think they know you or know all about you even before they know anything about you, right? That these snap judgments when it comes to, prejudice. And I was curious about, like, did you conceive of these things as like as a closed loop? Like, did you think about what Alex was hearing from his dad initially and how he was processing that towards the end of the story, or am I reading way too much into that?
No, I think you're reading, into it exactly what I wanted readers to read into it. He gets a lot of guidance from his parents, and kids, hopefully just as we can pass down that kind of negativity to our kids if we aren't careful. We can also as well pass down really productive and helpful things to our children. And so, Alex, he kind of like internalizes the things that he's learned from his parents, who have this kind of measured, really, positive, productive way of dealing with things, because they can see it kind of a bit more objectively. And so they can let him know, like, okay, this has happened. These are ways that you can deal with it. And so now let's put that into practice. And Alex has the agency to do that over time. So I definitely wanted to have that conversation with kids. On the other side of it, a lot of things that I see over the course of the last 15 years as a writer, is that, the attitudes that parents have, that adults have, that, first of all, they've developed from a place of not knowing, because we grew up, without the books that are around today. So, we have a lot of growth that is required on our end as parents and as adults. And as a result, if we do have negative attitudes towards people, I think that it is very often that, parents can pass that down to their kids, or they can kind of like project their own insecurities, their own fears, their own attitudes onto their kids, or through their kids. So I think that's all part of it. So yeah, it is a really nuanced conversation. I think there is a lot of complexity in the story because of that, but that's definitely a conversation. That's definitely an intention that I had in writing the characters and the situations that Alex finds himself in.
Did that intentionality come through with like the decision that Alex's father, the reason they moved from Norway House is because of his job, and his job is in Indigenous education and kind of reworking education to center Indigenous experience and story? Like, was that pretty much baked in from the start?
Yeah. And I think this is a part where, my dad is someone who has had an influence on a lot of my work, especially, of course, in literature and in other aspects of my work. And I've tried to, I've learned a lot from him. And my dad, he passed away about 4 years ago, but he's always present. And my dad worked in Indigenous education for many, many years. And in the work that he did, I've seen the benefits of the impacts of the work in the people that he touched. And so having that as a part of the story, and having kind of the spirit of that exist within Alex's father, it was very intentional. And it was a way for me to kind of pay tribute to my father, but also show when you have someone like that in your life, just like Alex's mom too, it's something that is of deep benefit to your development as a person, especially as you're growing and coming of age.
Yeah, as a hockey parent yourself, I was curious about the decision in terms of how you not necessarily center the parents and their role in the hockey life, but some of the action that happens is around the rink or off the ice, and how much of that was to show kind of the broader world of hockey and like family dynamics, or to just not make it about the ice and recognizing that the world off the rink exists at all times.
Yeah, I think that's part of the balance of the story. But I think a lot of the things that happen within the culture of hockey, within the life of a hockey player, it kind of filters into everyday life. I think a lot of the things that I've seen my son experience in playing hockey for the last 14, 13 years, I've seen a lot of growth on the ice from him, but I've also seen a lot of growth off the ice. And, that growth has come from, the camaraderie, the companionship, the discipline, the leadership that he has developed and experienced as a hockey player, and how it helped him in his everyday life. And I think it's important to see between action on the ice and also the everyday lives of the kids who are really in the end just kids, and so it's part of not wanting to have everything happen in the rink, but it's also a fact of life that we're not just kids aren't just only hockey players. They have a lot of stuff going on, and so one hopefully complements the other. And I think with Alex, that's true. The things that he learns in his life, he brings to the hockey rink, and a lot of things he takes from the hockey rink, he brings it into his life. And initially, some of that stuff is kind of negative, but and then over the course of time, it becomes a really positive experience for him.
He makes a fast friend with one teammate, and then he earns a friendship through his behavior and the reclamation of that other child, Terrence. I'm curious about kind of did you conceive of kind of those dynamics initially, or did The characters, did they kind of tell you where they were going as people? Like, how did you kind of come up with the thrust of that story?
Yeah, I mean, really intentional when I develop characters. So, I write character outlines for the main characters I have in books. So I kind of knew who was going to do what. But they definitely are, I think, like representative of the importance of human relationships, and the ability for us to reconcile difficult relationships. In the case of Terrence and Alex, what Terrence and Alex do in the story is eventually they get to know each other and they talk to each other. And when you talk about like the spirit of reconciliation, that's what it is. The spirit of reconciliation is talking to each other, listening to each other, and sharing with each other and learning about each other. And that's what I think Terrence and Alex are able to do in this story. And then I think you also find people in your life that you have a connection with, that you just instantly become fast friends with, and you find things that you can relate to in each other. And there's some great people in your lives that are your biggest fans and your greatest supporters, and that's someone that like Worf is in this story. And Worf is actually a real character in real life. He's someone who was friends with my son and still is friends with my son for many years. Like most every year they played hockey together. Not only that, they played hockey on the same line together. So he's someone that I definitely always intended to bring into the story, because he's a character in real life, and he's a great kid. And so I wanted to use him as a character, but he has a lot of qualities that Worf has in the story. So they're all planned, and you kind of like bring these characters in as you develop them, and you put them in situations, and there's some plotting, of course, involved, and like where it's going, what happens when. But if you know your characters well enough, they also kind of do their own things, and you kind of guide them back to where they need to be sometimes. But it does give that kind of organic, natural feel to the progression of the story if you give them a bit of freedom. And that freedom comes from when you know your characters very well, they can operate on their own in the story, and you kind of learn how to kind of hold their hand and guide them around a little bit.
Does the real Worf know he's in this book?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
He totally does. Yeah, he's been asking me for years. Like, have you started writing the book yet, Dave? Have you started writing the book? So yeah, he's intimately aware that the book is happening, and he's in it. He's seen the cover, and he's really excited. He hasn't read it yet, but he's pretty excited to read it. My son is really, obviously Alex Robinson in the book. I didn't want to give him the name Cole Robertson, because having a character named after the author in the book, it seems a little, I don't know what it would seem, but so I wanted to give him like a little alteration to the name, but I definitely wanted to have him still be called Robbie, because my son's hockey name is usually Robbie on teams, so that was important to keep that. But yeah, Worf is he definitely knows he's in the book, and he's very excited about it.
I read an interview you did with Quill and Quire that said, you listen to alternative rock when you're writing. Were you like exclusively listening to like jock jams or things that would have been heard in the arena when you were writing this book?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, like I definitely create playlists for books when I write them, because it gets me in the right mood, in the right kind of headspace. It creates the right atmosphere. So whether if I'm writing an adult literary fiction, I'll have a playlist that I write for that. Write to music is a big part of my writing process. So definitely with this story, I had a lot of rock music and a lot of kind of like arena music that I hear a lot in rinks, and that kind of get me fired up. Especially like when I was a kid playing sports. I'm a child of like the 80s and the 90s, so there's a bit of that in the playlist as well, like a lot of Pearl Jam, that stuff like that. But yeah, definitely you listen to that, it gets you in the right state of mind, and it kind of fires you up in the right moments when you're writing as well. So it's kind of funny to think about getting fired up when you're writing at a typewriter at a keyboard. But yeah, you definitely want to get like when you're writing hockey action, you want to really get hockey action going, and I think music really helps in that regard.
Well, the Kodiaks home ice advantage out through Highwater Press. David, thanks very much for taking some time to talk about the book, and congratulations on its release.
Oh, thanks a lot. I really appreciate it. Hope everyone enjoys it.